get older. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, hey.
I get older, doctors that tell you don't smoke, don't drink, eat certain foods. I mean, at my age, what can I look forward to, you know? I mean, from this point on, if I take excellent care of myself, I'll get very sick and die. Suddenly, I'm depressed. Nah, it's tough. Nobody has it easy, Johnny.
Yeah,
Nobody. The other day, the guy stopped me in the street. I could see he was down and out, you know. He asked me to give him some money for a bottle of booze, you know. I looked at him, I says, and I know your type. I'll give you money for a bottle of booze, you'll go out and buy food with it.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, October the 19th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and some bullfight music, we will have Hamasaki is Wrong, Tricks Are for Kids, Skepticism, Feeling Safe, My Take, Rules for Radical Conservatives, Rules for Retrogrades, Rules for Patriots, No Free Lunch, Bishop-barron, and Vivek Ramaswamy, and Inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Like all other contracts, wages should be left to the fair and free competition of the market and should never be controlled by the interference of the legislature. David Ricardo. What the great classical economist does here is remarkable in its prescience. He notes the similarity between wage manipulation and all other contract price manipulation. Over 150 years later, the concept of government-set contract terms would still be unfathomable in a market economy, yet wage controls by federal government fiat would gain a foothold. Ricardo's warnings are rooted in the consistency of first principles broadly applied. The setting of prices, including the price of wages, is best left to the two parties in the exchange.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, new book called Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Chapter 1.
Plunkett, Tammany Hall. Sympathy for the Devil. An introduction by Che Kahane. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am the father of David Kahane, whose work you know from the internet and from the pages of the National Review online, and whose Rules for Radical Conservatives you are now holding in your hand. Whether you have purchased this volume or stolen it, as my old friend and compadre in the Revolution, Abbie Hoffman, famously urged in the title of one of his own works, I already know one very important thing about you. In the great grim battle between left and right, between good and evil, between Satan and St. Michael, between Wormwood and the patient, you have already lost. Welcome to the permanent campaign, permanently to be waged against you until the end of time or our total victory, whichever comes first. Look at yourself in the mirror. What do you see? Don't tell me. I already know. You see a coward, a weakling, a quivering mass of protoplasm, a spineless jellyfish, a neutered creature stripped of dignity and cowering in fear. With what seems like lightning suddenness, as the old sports cliche goes, your world has been turned upside down, the old verities tossed onto the ash heap of history, and you are now face to face with us in all our glory. Finally freed from the masks and the chains, able to reveal ourselves as we really are, cloaked for one brief moment, not in the shade, but by the sun, like something out of Blake. You owe me all, as Mr. Dollarhide says in Red Dragon. And see how neatly I tie up my pop culture, literary, and artistic illusions? Who on your side can do that? This is our time. This is our moment. Stop us if you can. But you won't. Even as we draw the knife blade of nihilism across your throat, you will never muster the will to resist. You are the boiling frog, incrementally heated, accepting of every diminution and indignity, each hotter than the last, until at last you slip blissfully into that dark world to which we pay homage, but in which we ourselves at root fear to tread. Because this one thing we know. You will never fight back against people like us. We have done this to you, and we have done it by design. We have changed up to down, right to wrong, black to white, night to day. Via our silken garrote of political correctness, we have undermined and hamstrung your very ability to think with clarity, to judge with confidence, and to see us for what we really are. We not only want resistance to be futile, we want it to be unthinkable. After all, it's exhausting, this constant fear and worry. Eternal vigilance is a price you're no longer willing to pay for your liberty. Let me whisper in your ear. Lay down your burden. It's easier this way. Come, lay down your heavy load. Go along, get along. Join us. You'll pardon, I trust, such candor from an ostensible stranger. But in fact, you have met me before, many times over the course of the centuries. I was present when the Sodomites came for Lot's guests and rejected his living daughters, and again when his wife turned toward the burning city, listening to the tempting voices in her ears, before the enemy transformed her into a pillar of salt for the simple crime of feminine curiosity. I was there at Belshazzar's feast when the moving hand writ large upon the wall, Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. As the poet sings, I was there when Pilate washed his hands of the Christ, when the Tsar and his family were murdered, when Oswald's bullet went through the back of Jack Kennedy's head. And speaking of poets, the great Alighieri knew me well, and my allies, consigning us to the various lower circles of his imaginary hell, an amusing anticipatory revenge that we have now rendered moot. Your poets have long warned you about the likes of me. Oh, that anthropomorphical rag that has such demons in it. You agree with Baudelaire that the devil's best deception is convincing you that he doesn't exist. A trick that I, dear reader, would never dream of attempting. For I am one with my hero, Satan, the true hero of Paradise Lost. Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. And in the lowest deep, a lower deep still threatening to devour me opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. That Milton sure could write dialogue. But I digress. What we offer here is a guided tour through the new circle of hell that we have laid out for you. Something that even Dante could not have envisioned. A hell of your own making, and in which you freely choose to dwell. To that end, I now send you my only begotten son, David, in whom I am so well pleased. It is he who will explain to you what we have done to you, so carefully, so methodically over the decades of my lifetime. He who will explain to you our tricks and wheedles, our seductive lies, our entirely reasonable exhortation to self-destruction. It is he who will give you the tools and the weapons with which to fight back, secure in the knowledge that you will never use them. I have to admit, despite my fatherly pride, that occasionally he gets carried away and actually tries to see things as you see them. He has in him a great weakness, which is occasional compassion for the enemy. He blames it on something or somebody he refers to as the amanuensis. I suspect it is one of the principal enemy's little tricks. If at times he seems actually to mean the advice he so freely dispenses, put it down to youthful exuberance. In time, he will be mine completely. As of course, will you. And why am I encouraging young David to do this? Because even a bully every now and then enjoys an honest fight, if only by which to measure his own magnificent stature and moral rectitude. So consider this a formal introduction to my boy's book. Bulgakov would know what I mean, and with it, an over-the-shoulder paraphrase of the great Alinsky. To the enemy, from all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which, the very first conservative known to man, whose ludicrous mercy and goodness created the establishment against which I and my kind are privileged for all eternity to rebel, and who did it so ineffectively that he allowed us our own kingdom from which to wage war on his God. Enjoy, if you can.
And that was Chapter 1 of Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Retrogrades, the epilogue.
Epilogue. My brothers, I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship, but it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields, when the age of men comes crashing down, but it is not this day. This day we fight! By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Battle of Morannon.
And that was the epilogue from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Thus they believe the Constitution calls for the separation of church and state. There is no such thing as transcendent truth, and moral absolutes don't exist. So if we're going to engage this emerging generation, we're going to have to define our terms and ourselves clearly and explicitly. If there's one of our tactics that needs a complete overhaul, it is this one. We're still speaking Betamax VHS, and the culture, especially the emerging generation, is speaking Blu-ray. One of the best books on this subject I've ever read is Beyond Belief to Conviction by Josh McDowell. McDowell talks about how terms that used to have a consensus definition in past generations now mean totally different things. The best example is the term tolerance. Tolerance used to mean, hey, I may not agree with you and what you're doing or what you believe, but as long as you're not doing anything illegal and your business stays your business, then it's no business of mine. But now tolerance means you must accept, validate, and then participate in everything I am doing that is not illegal, and not only must it be your business, but your children's business as well. That's just one example of how we have lost the language here. In this media-driven age of mass communication and social networking, he who controls the language has control. Even our attempts to combat this have been ineffective. For instance, in a misguided attempt to appear culturally relevant and sensitive, the past generation of conservative leaders created their own code words like traditional values to avoid saying Judeo-Christian or biblical. In other words, they redefined their terms to appease their enemies. Ironically, these code words are actually more offensive than the real words. When I tell someone I am taking this stand because I am a Christian, they may not agree, but since they're usually not a Christian, they at least understand that disagreement is coming from my bitter clinging to my guns and my religion. However, if I tell them I'm taking this stand because I'm for traditional values, I just told them they have no values or that their values are out of the mainstream when the mainstream is currently preaching their values. Therefore, my attempt to soften the blow just created more enmity instead. Good luck finding common ground or bringing them over to your side from there. What I have found when interacting with those who don't share my worldview is the exact opposite is true. The more I clearly define what I believe and why I believe it, the more credibility I develop with them, and the more willing they are to engage me in the arena of ideas, provided I do one thing. I must apply my standard consistently. Let me repeat that for emphasis. We must apply our standard consistently. Translation: the Bible and the Constitution must be equally applied to Democrats and Republicans. Since we are no longer a silent majority in this country, we cannot just continue to subjectively admonish Democrats and provide Republicans political exoneration for their violation of the laws of nature and nature's God and expect to get our way on Election Day. In this next phase of the culture war, we're going to need converts to our side. And in this day and age, no one wants to sign up with a bunch of hypocrites. If we want the culture at large to accept our truth claims, then we must have integrity in applying them. I define integrity as a consistency between right belief and right behavior, or long obedience in the right direction. Without integrity, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no relationship. Without relationship, there is no hope of getting others to see things your way. As the old saying goes, no one cares what you know until they know how much you care. The American people don't believe that we really believe these principles like limited government and Judeo-Christian morality that we're clamoring for all the time because they see our unwillingness to hold Republicans to the same standard as Democrats. They think all we care about is beating Democrats and not what's best for the country. Sadly, too many conservative groups have fed this stereotype. We have been defined as hypocrites, and every time we do something like spend 3 years scourging the evils of Obamacare, only to turn right around and anoint the architect of its predecessor Rodney our presidential nominee, we end up playing right along with their narrative. Another recent hypocrisy perfectly illustrates my point. In 2012, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee said allowing homosexuals to openly serve in the U.S. military was a settled issue, and Republicans would not seek to repeal it. This after years of Republicans fighting the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is one of the few culture war issues John McCain has actually been willing to stand for. But now a Republican majority in the U.S. Congress won't seek to reassert the policy it fought against being repealed and hammered Democrats for. Then what was the point in the first place? Not to mention, if a Democrat chairman of the Armed Services Committee had said that every pro-family group in the country would have flooded my email inbox with fundraising calls to, quote, fight the liberals trying to impose their Hollywood values on the rest of us. We may view ourselves as conservatives, constitutionalists, and or Christians, but the reality is We have allowed our enemy to define us as hypocrites, which is our own fault. Attacks are only damaging when they're true. Someone can accuse me of beating my wife all they want, but as long as she comes out and says it's not true, it says more about them than it does me. Therefore, the damages that come from being attacked are always self-inflicted, either because you are who they say you are, or you fail to respond accordingly or with a tin ear. All other attacks are opportunities, with your attackers providing you with the means, motive, and opportunity to define yourself without sounding like you're self-righteous or a self-promoter. We are also allowing our enemies to define the argument. That's a big one. Why do pro-life groups just accept being labeled anti-abortion? Why do pro-family groups accept being labeled anti-same-sex marriage? When did illegal aliens become undocumented immigrants? How come conservatives allow these characterizations to go unchallenged when they're being interviewed or communicating via their own platforms? Why do conservatives accept Orwellian, politically correct doublespeak like pro-choice or sexual orientation and then expect to actually win the argument after the other side has already framed it? After all, the right to life is the default position of the Declaration of Independence, which is the organic law of these United States. So shouldn't those who oppose that right be described as anti-life or pro-death? Marriage as the union between one man and one woman is among the oldest traditions in the 5,000 plus years of recorded human history. So shouldn't those who seek to undo it be described as anti-marriage? One of the reasons we conservatives get a bad rap for only being defined by what we're against is because, well, we allow ourselves to be only defined by what we're against. We must stop allowing the left to define us in the argument if we actually want to win the argument. A pretty good rule of thumb is if this is how your enemy wants to be defined or wants to define you, you don't want to use that definition. For example, two terms we should never use. That's right, never use, are abortion and sexual orientation. Abortion sounds indifferent to what is actually taking place, which is intentional. When your kid is getting his tonsils out, the doctor calls it a tonsillectomy. So how come when a mother is having her child removed, it's not called a pediaectomy? Probably because there'd be a lot less of them if it had always been defined by what it actually is: child killing. Whenever pro-lifers are using a public platform to defend the God-given, inalienable right to life, we need to define child killing as child killing. Would you rather be pro-choice or pro-child killing? Some of you reading this now will balk immediately at what I just wrote, worried about such coarse language coming across as offensive. If you're one of those people, then start over at the beginning of this book and reread. If after rereading it you still don't get it, then do the rest of us a favor. Get out of politics because you're not cut out for it. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're not cut out for warfare and you're only getting in the way of victory. I guess I'm kind of strange because I'm more worried about offending the God our politicians swear their oath of office to, and he hates the shedding of innocent blood, than I am offending the ones shedding that innocent blood. I guess I'm more worried about saving babies than I'm worried about upsetting those killing them. We would not consider calling a serial killer pro-choice for choosing to take the lives of innocent people. So why would we refer to those who have assented to the slaughter of at least 50 million American citizens in such antiseptic terms? It's quite simple, really. If you want to raise awareness among the American people in order to move them to stop child killing, then you should probably define it as, get this, child killing. It's no wonder abortion ranks low among the issue priorities for many Americans because it sounds indifferent and impersonal. However, many of those same Americans, regardless of belief system, would instinctively act right away if someone was threatening innocent children in their neighborhood. Calling child killing what it is goes a long way towards creating a similar sense of urgency. Likewise, there's no such thing as sexual orientation. This term implies the natural gender each of us is born with is somehow insufficient in determining our identity, when nothing could be further from the truth. To agree to that premise would require making the case God makes mistakes. I don't put windshield wiper fluid in my gas tank and then expect the car to run properly because it has a different fuel orientation. The intelligent designer of the car intended for the parts he designed to work together for a reason, and the car doesn't work properly unless we use it as its designer intended. Similarly, males and females created in the image of God each have parts the other doesn't have. Those parts fit together, and it just so happens the primary purpose they fit together is for procreation. Amazing, isn't it? Almost like there's a plan or something. If we don't get a grip on the language here, the next stop will be the twilight zone. Here's what happens when a culture reaches the twilight zone. In an era defined by bad ideas whose time has come, This one ranks right up, or should I say, down there. As of November 2013, parents in Germany will now be given a third option for defining their child's gender on his or her birth certificate. No, I didn't just make that up. Yes, you heard that right. But there aren't three genders, you say. There are only boys and girls, you claim. Well, that's because you still live in the dark ages with the rest of history's losers, bitterly clinging to your guns and your Bibles. See, you're still holding on to those antiquated traditions of Western civilization, the very moral value system that made liberty and prosperity possible. As a progressive bureaucrat in Oregon recently said, you need to be rehabilitated. Once rehabilitated, you will come to learn what all the progressives currently saving Western civilization have come to learn, although we have no idea where or how they learned it. And that idea is that a child's gender could be, quote, indeterminate, as the German government now asserts. Facebook offers you over 50 different ways to identify your gender. True, for eons now, humankind of all races, ethnicities, and belief systems simply looked between a newborn's legs to determine what gender he or she was and then raised it accordingly. But that is so passé. Just because we've been doing it that way for 5,000 years doesn't mean we should keep on denying such randomly evolved primates' quests for self-actualization. After all, who are we to judge? How can I possibly impose my definition of penis, vagina, male or female on another human being? If there is no standard we're all ultimately accountable to, then there really is no standard at all, and everyone does what he or she sees fit. This chaos is what progressives describe as freedom. Granted, Western civilization has traditionally defined freedom to mean freedom from our sinful nature, to do what's right without government redefining right from wrong to suit its own status desires, and then to profit off of doing so. Thus we can pass on a better way of life to our gender-specific offspring than we had. But why hold on to cherished traditions that build the most successful human civilizations this side of Eden when we instead can trade it all in for a culture so indeterminate we don't even know what gender we are? If only we could get the progressive status to throw in $17 trillion in debt as well to sweeten the deal. I mean, wow, who would make that trade in a heartbeat? Can you shout Allah Akbar? I hope so, because it looks like you'll need to sooner rather than later. Maybe you don't think this is your problem. Maybe you think whatever doesn't impact your wallet is none of your concern. Except the very people peddling this dead sprint towards Gomorrah are the same people that steal from you in the name of compassion. So either way, you will be made to care. But why stop at the child's birth? We shouldn't impose a gender on a child ever. What blessed diversity that would be. Imagine gender becoming like an Almond Joy candy bar commercial from back in the day. Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. But let's not overreact with one of those dreaded slippery slope arguments. I mean, it's not like we'll have kids in schools determining what bathrooms to use based on what gender they feel they are on a given day or anything. But wait, they already are doing that as we speak. In the People's Republic of California, of course. If you want to save marriage and stop your children from being indoctrinated into believing that which God says is wrong is suddenly right, then don't accept the terminology of those doing that which you oppose. Previous generations that built this country didn't refer to someone's sexual orientation. They referred to someone behaving immorally, and so should we. Please note, the previous generations that built the country didn't have the systemic moral problems we currently have, so we would be wise to follow in their footsteps. Oh, and please stop using terms like same-sex marriage, gay marriage, or traditional marriage. There is only marriage. What's next? Referring to couples shacking up as pre-marriage? Everyone already knows what a marriage is, so accepting the premise that it can't be redefined or clarified by either side is allowing our enemies to define us. Since we hold the moral high ground, we should be defining them. Branding is so important in our culture. You may prefer Pepsi, but when you go to a movie or out to eat, your default is to ask for a Coke. Mind share always equals market share. The power of the brand becomes embedded in the subconscious of our fellow Americans. And if that branding is done by the American left, we are doing ourselves irreparable harm in the long run by reinforcing it. Instead of reinforcing the left's branding, we need to introduce our own.
And that was Chapter 8 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
The laity's job is to sanctify the secular order because they're the ones who understand the secular order. So someone who's into, let's say, finance or investment, someone into education, someone's into journalism, someone's into entertainment. Well, they know those worlds better than I do. I don't know the details of how to make that more of a loving place, if I can state it kind of simply. How to bring the gospel of love and forgiveness and nonviolence and cooperation and justice into those arenas. Bottom line, are you making this part of life more conform to love? Now, how do you do that? People ask me, I'll say, well, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I can articulate the principle for you. But I would bring private equity investors together in one room, physicians and nurses together. I bring lawyers together in one room and say, okay, you guys know these realms. You tell me, what's the best way to bring greater love and justice and so on to your arena? That's the old Catholic action model. Goes back to the 1940s and 50s. I like that model, and I think it's too bad that we let it fall.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Quote, "The essence of capitalism's foreign policy is free trade, i.e. the abolition of trade barriers, of protective tariffs, of special privileges, the opening up of the world's trade routes to free international exchange and competition among the private citizens of all countries dealing directly with one another." Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, as far as Israel, the war in Israel is concerned, one of the other reasons that everybody should be against Hamas and against Hezbollah is when they're firing rockets. These rockets are indiscriminate. They're firing it into Israel, yes, but there's a whole lot of Arabs that live in Israel and that are Israeli citizens. There's Arabs that are in the Israeli Knesset, their parliament. So these missiles don't have Israeli names on them. When they land, if they land among Arabs, those Arabs are just as dead as Jews. Okay, so what Hamas and what Hezbollah are doing is absolutely indiscriminate. It's not war, it's not combat, it is simply butchery. That's all there is to it. And that should... every person in the world should look at that, be horrified and repulsed, and act accordingly. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of Stuart Varney.
Department says there has been an increase in risky interactions with Chinese planes. How many incidents are we talking about?
Way too many, Stu. Let's get to it. Department of Defense warning of an uptick in coercive and risky interactions with Chinese planes. Get this, there's the number on your screen. Since the fall of 2021, that's 2 years ago, everybody, the DoD has seen more than 180 incidents, more in the past 2 years than in the entire decade before that. This includes reckless maneuvers, shot-off flares, or approaches too rapidly or too close to U.S. aircraft. One Chinese jet, Stu, coming within 40 feet from a U.S. aircraft. 40 feet, that's like from here to there. Yeah, exactly.
So, again, what are they doing? It's all deterministic. They say there's an increase in risky incidents. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. This is one of the reasons why people don't get excited. You hear talk show hosts say, well, how come nobody's motivated? This is the reason. Because you're telling people that some things are just happening. And it's also a good way to give people a general sense of unease. It's a false portrait of our universe. The left wants you to think that the universe is a very scary place, when as a matter of fact, we know with absolute certainty the exact opposite, that success is to be expected. But if we cannot put names to the actors, who did what and who's at fault, then it does paint an erroneous picture in which it seems that the universe is just blowing up. That all these bizarre things are just happening and happening at random. and that's to, again, increase your anxiety. It works for Fox News because, again, more anxiety means people are going to be tuning in, ratings go up, and they get rich. And they should be ashamed of themselves. So be aware of that. Listen carefully. I've said it over and over again. I'll keep saying it. Listen carefully, and listen first and foremost to your conscience. If your conscience says, I don't know, something about this doesn't seem right, because that's what I'm listening to Stuart Varney and his buddy there talking about these incidents. Something said, I had this weird kind of uneasy feelings, a general anxiety. And when I get that way, I think, well, what am I supposed to do about this? And when there's no answer to that question, that's when I realize they're playing tricks. Tricks are for kids. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit more of Stuart Varney.
But is there a declining demand for EVs? That's the question investors are asking.
Is this a dip worth buying, in your opinion?
I think we're going to find out.
There we go. Okay, so this is skepticism in action. Anytime somebody is asked, and it seems universal, that if you ask somebody, and try it as an experiment today, go out and ask somebody a yes or no question like Stuart Varney just did. He asked his guests, is this worth buying on the dip? Okay, he's talking about Tesla stock, which has dropped. And so he should be giving either a yes or a no answer. We will find out, he says. Why? Why is he afraid to give a yes or no answer? Simple. Because there's always going to be some butthole that is then going to come back and challenge. A yes or no answer is a statement of certainty. And somebody's going to challenge that certainty. They're going to say, you don't know that. Or, but what if I want this? Or what if I want that? And if you don't understand what it is that these questioners are doing, that they're questioning your certainty of knowledge, and that then you're going to be intimidated. Okay? Don't allow yourself to be intimidated. When you ask somebody a yes or no question, they should give you a yes or no answer. If you're asked a yes or no question, you should give a yes or no answer. Okay, unless it's a trick question, of course. But further on this particular point is where the skepticism angle on this situation is where anytime you're going to be making a statement of certainty, there's going to be somebody there. For instance, if you tell your friends, my boss is a butthole. Okay, that's a statement of certainty. Your friends are going to fight that. Because again, it's like universal, where they've been brainwashed into believing that there is no such thing as certainty. There's only approximations or whatever. So they're going to come back at you and say, well, maybes. They're going to give you the well, maybes. They could also say, well, you don't know that. But that's harder to do because you work for the boss, they don't. So they're going to say, well, maybe. They're going to start making excuses for your boss. Well, maybe he's sick. Well, maybe he's having problems with his wife. Well, maybe he's having problems with his kids. Well, maybe he has some kind of mental issues. Maybe he's under a lot of stress. And the whole point of all those maybes is to put you on the spot, to make you question your sanity. Because when you say your boss is a butthole, you know that your boss is a butthole. When they come along, people who haven't even met your boss, and start questioning that, they are in essence questioning your sanity and encouraging you to do the same. And if you allow yourself to be intimidated and to the point where you are questioning your own sanity, you're worthless. Worthless to yourself and everybody else. Back in a minute. Thank you. And yet more, Stuart Varney.
The violence in Israel and Gaza has led to dozens of pro-Palestinian protests at college campuses. I'm going to be joined by a student at Yeshiva University, and I'll ask her if she feels safe at her school in New York.
And so there we go. Feel. See, this is the Stuart Varney who tries to pretend that he's some sort of a conservative or whatever. And when you use terms like that, you betray yourself as the socialist that you really are. Look, it doesn't matter whether you feel safe. That's not the issue. The question is, are you safe? And you use objective measures and standards to come to that, to draw that conclusion. Okay, am I safe at home? Well, see, my door's locked, so yes, I am safe. And the same thing applies here. Is she safe? Is there a police presence? Is there security presence? Are there locks on the doors? Then she's safe, whether she feels safe or not. But feelings are unassailable, because somebody can say, well, I don't feel safe, and who can argue with that? I can't argue, I can, because I know what I'm doing, but most people can't argue with somebody else's feelings. You're not going to be able to convince the other person that they don't feel safe. So, but the point is not whether or not you feel safe, it's whether or not you are safe. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Tonight, the president addresses the nation. He will outline the support we will give to Israel. But he leads a divided party. Not all Democrats are on board with his policies. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib tearfully said this.
President Biden, not all Americans with you on this one. And you need to wake up and understand that. We are literally watching people commit genocide and killing the vast majority just like this. And we still stand by and say nothing. We will remember this. But all of you need to know, I swear to God, Allah, you are on the right side of history.
Rashida, despite the evidence, speaks as if the Israelis attacked the Gaza hospital. She is pushing Hamas lies in the United States Congress. Senator Bernie Sanders calls the Israeli siege of Gaza a war crime. The squad lines up behind the ceasefire and de-escalate banners, always pushing for a Hamas victory, rarely acknowledging the despicable surprise massacre which Hamas inflicted on Israeli civilians on October the 7th. Anti-Semitism is alive and well in the Democrat Party. Where does this leave Jewish voters who traditionally support Democrat candidates? Where does this leave the president? He's reportedly going to ask Congress for a $10 billion aid package for Israel. Any opposition from Democrats will not look good. The worst thing here is that the left is deliberately inflaming public opinion. They are waging an anti-Israel, pro-Hamas campaign, and the Arab world is taking their cue from members of the United States Congress. That is outrageous. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
So a couple of things. First of all, with the Rashida Tlaib thing, what is she doing? Not what is she saying, what is she doing? Stuart Varney's stupid, and he's analyzing what she's saying. What she's doing is being provocative. She's being an agent provocateur. She is trying to create a riot. She wants to create a riot and then have it escalate into eventually a civil war and or worldwide revolution, et cetera, to usher in either Islamic or socialist paradise. Take your pick. Okay, so that's what she's trying to do there. The other part that was interesting that he was talking about was how she doesn't say anything when Israel gets attacked. But that's what I'm saying also about the news media. This is the way you know with certainty that the news media is against Israel. When Hamas was beheading people and just committing all kinds of atrocities, not one media outlet, not even Fox, stood up and said ceasefire. Must be a ceasefire. Not one media outlet, Fox included, said this is a humanitarian catastrophe. Not one. But as soon as Israel even threatens to go across the border, then we start hearing about humanitarian catastrophe. We hear about ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. So, back in a minute. Thank you. And now, inside Delta Force.
Gentlemen, the unit commander. We jumped to our feet and the position of attention as Colonel Beckwith swept down the center aisle of the classroom like a hungry bear headed for a bee tree. This was the first time Beckwith had addressed us as a class. "Sit down, men, sit down," he growled and waved us back into our seats. He stood there at the front of the classroom with his fists in his hip pockets, and for a full minute looked us over with a penetrating glare. He looked and sounded a lot like the old cowboy actor Chill Wills, but in a malevolent sort of way. His gravelly voice rumbled up from deep within his chest. He had on dirty suede desert boots and wore his khaki trousers slung low under his belly. Up top, he wore an open-necked, blue Oxford shirt underneath a navy blazer. He looked like the clothes had been thrown at him and more or less landed in the right places. He also looked like he could not have cared less. And this from a man who later hired a fashion consultant to teach us how to dress. Finally, he spoke again. "Well," he drawled, "you boys just got a little taste of what we're all about, eh? We ain't selling shoes or making cornflakes round here. It's serious business we talking about. You gotta kill, and you gotta be damn good at it, 'cause we ain't taking no prisoners. We ain't sending no terrorist bastards to prison just so they buddies can take more hostages to get 'em loose. No, sir. We're gonna drop 'em dead on the ground and make martyrs out of 'em. That's the best way to go about it. And you can't be shooting no hostages while you're doing it," he thundered. "I ain't gonna be splaining to the president why we went in and shot up a bunch of innocent folks we was supposed to be rescuing." Beckwith had slipped into the Georgia cracker dialect he favored for speaking to us on serious matters, or when he was angry. As I came to know him, I realized it was an affectation he used for dramatic effect. Beckwith was in deadly earnest about the subject of terrorism, but he was always a showman. "So, you got to be good, and you got to be smart," he continued as he paced back and forth across the front of the room. "I'll take care of the luck." He stopped dead center in the room and leaned toward us, a smile creeping across his face. "And I'll tell you what you're working towards," he went on. "Soon's you boys finish OTC, we'll have enough bodies here to officially form this unit. Then we're gonna take about 6 months to do our unit training, and after that, I'm gonna tell the president we're ready to go. And then you better grab your asses, 'cause I'm gonna keep you busy. I tell you, things gonna be so good, we're gonna do such great things, it'll be like picking up diamonds from right off the ground. Yes, sirree, diamonds as big as mule turds. So y'all pay attention to what Bill and his team are teaching you. This phase of training is about to get dangerous, and I can't afford to lose none of you, yet. All right, Bill, they're yours. Carry on." And with that, he launched himself down the aisle and out the door so fast we barely made it to our feet before he was gone. Well, that was entertaining. Diamonds big as mule turds, eh? We'll have to see about that. One man's diamond is another man's turd, and he can't afford to lose any of us yet? I wonder when he can afford to lose some of us. But he was certainly right about one thing. The next phase of training had the potential to be very, very dangerous. However, I had every confidence in our crew of instructors. They had gotten us to this point in a masterful fashion, and I was certain they would bring us through the next hurdles. We spent the rest of the morning in the classroom while Alan diagrammed the steps of room combat on the blackboard. He drew the sequence of each team member's movement and actions just the way Bill had talked through their steps for us in the shooting house. On the board, it was easy to see how the room was divided into overlapping sectors of coverage. In the room, it hadn't been so readily visible. Speed, surprise, and violence of action. Those were the keys to success and survival. Those and the ability to shoot what we intended to shoot and nothing else. We were not just going to go in harm's way. We were going to charge down harm's throat, grab a handful of his guts, and turn him inside out. The individual attributes of an aggressive and adventurous spirit were such fundamental requirements for this work that it was just taken for granted that each man had what was necessary. Selection had seen to that. Now we were just adding the skills. We started in the shooting house, as we had on the range, first walking through without weapons, then with but dry firing. Next, walking through live firing with one target, then adding targets. We increased our speed until we could move at a full run. It was exciting, standing outside the door to a room in a ready position, muscles tensing, wound up like a coiled spring, guns going off in the other rooms, Bill, Mike, Alan, or Bob holding the handle to the door, counting down with voice and fingers, 3, 2, 1, execute, execute, execute. You blast inside and immediately make a turn left or right. Sometimes a target is right in your face, right inside the doorway. You have to shoot on the move, shoot and keep moving at full speed, and keep shooting until all targets are taken out. Then you assess the room for other dangers, other threats. Your heart is still pounding from that burst of speed and energy, but your mind has to remain calm and detached. It's like you have to observe yourself and the scene from outside your body, from a spot on the ceiling where you can take it all in with a fisheye lens. Soon it feels good. It feels fluid. You start to clear the room with a style that feels automatic. If a target is in your sector, you shoot it without even looking to see the hits, because you know where the shots went before they were fired. Your pistol or submachine gun follows your eyes, while your mind ranges ahead. You can feel the gun moving in your hands, sense and count the shots as they're fired, but you never really hear the sounds of the shots going off. Somewhere about that time, we added hostage targets to the equation. Then our instructors switched to cartoon targets that sometimes held weapons and sometimes didn't. That caused a little hesitation and embarrassment at first, but soon it made no difference at all. We either shot for the weapons held by the targets or at targets identified as bad, whether they had weapons or not, just as the instructor flung open the door and we hurled ourselves inside to do battle. Then we started working in pairs, 2 men in at a time, the first man in taking the heavy side, the second man going to the other side of the room. That added a whole new dimension and feel to the exercise. Hearing and feeling the fire from a partner, knowing the angles of fire were shifting and changing, and that a friendly was in the room. The angles and elevations of your shots took on added importance. You didn't want to hit your mate, or he you, but sometimes the rounds you fired would miss him by inches, and his would pass just as closely by you. Next, we added teammate down drills. How to pick up a partner's side of the room if he was shot and incapacitated, or his weapons malfunctioned. We shifted from room to room and partner to partner, and each scenario was different from the one before. When we were fluent clearing a room as a 2-man team, we started rotating through the aircraft room. To clear a section of an aircraft cabin, 2 men would rush down the aisle looking for all the world like a set of deadly Siamese twins. The lead man low and his partner right over his shoulder, one clearing left and the other right. Headshots were the norm because that's all that could usually be seen of a target over the tops of the seats and the heads of the passengers. To make those shots running at full speed and not touch a hostage was the most difficult task imaginable. All our shots passed within a hair's distance of a friendly, but there was no excuse for so much as grazing a hostage. To do so meant the dreaded public self-criticism drill. When we could function and function well as 2-man teams, we formed into 4-man teams. We shifted around the shooting house between rooms and team members. An instructor was in charge of each room, and we rotated from station to station. Every room presented a new problem and a different situation to overcome. When clearing the aircraft room as a 4-man team, we would enter the cabin by the overwing emergency exit and immediately break into a pair of 2-man teams, one team clearing forward and the other team aft. We worked on emergency evacuations and how to move stunned and frightened passengers with a minimum of effort and fuss. I felt confident, not only in my own abilities, but also in the abilities of all my comrades. There wasn't a single man in the group I had the slightest hesitation about going into a room with and letting loose a storm of gunfire. About that time, Bill made an announcement. "You've all done well, guys, and you've come a long way in a very short time. You're actually much farther along than we were in the same period of training." It was hard to imagine those 4 men ever being novices at close-quarter battle. But now we're going to take a break from the shooting house. I'm going to turn you over to Dave Donaldson. He and his crew will be in charge of your breaching training. Some of it is mechanical, but most of it is concerned with explosives. You'll be working with Dave for a couple of weeks, and then you'll come back to the shooting house to apply what you've learned. Give Dave and his team the attention you've given us, and we'll see you again later. He paused. Just make sure you come back with all your fingers. And with those words, I saw Bill smile for the first time. Mentally and physically, Dave Donaldson was a perfectly proportioned human being. He wasn't quite average height, maybe 5 feet 7 inches, but he had the presence of a large man. He was an old Special Forces engineer, a demolitions specialist, and he knew more about the practical use of explosives than any man alive. That message didn't come across because he talked about what he knew, but because he could show you what to do and how to do it, with all 10 fingers. Just as there are no old, bold pilots, There are no old, fearless demo men. You have to handle explosives the way you would handle a large, bad-tempered rattlesnake. You never take the snake for granted, and you never, ever let your attention wander. With demolitions, you check everything over not just once, but 3 times, and you never take shortcuts. If you do, you may become atomized pink goo on the nearest undemolished hard surface. We were already experienced in the use of standard military explosives. For the combat infantryman, the ranger, and the special forces soldier, explosives are just another tool for making a hole in something or knocking it over efficiently. And if you can harm your enemy in the process, so much the better. But Dave was going to teach us breaching, which means getting into a place causing the least damage and using the least material. Dave and his crew were already pretty knowledgeable on the mechanical end of the spectrum, but to prepare for the course, they talked to the real experts, convicted cat burglars and escape artists serving long-term sentences in maximum security prisons. The prisoners really warmed up once they understood that they were helping a secret military organization by divulging their techniques and unique abilities. We all came away duly impressed and better informed. It's sort of funny. Those guys ply their skills and the government sends them to prison. We ply the same skills on behalf of that very same government and get paid to do it. We started by learning to quietly break into buildings. We learned to scale the outsides of buildings to get to upper floors, to descend to lower ones or drop unharmed from roofs. Using a push drill and a straightened coat hanger, we opened window latches from the outside. Then we went to work on door locks. We learned about the various styles of locks and their internal workings. We made duplicate keys, jimmied locks, and picked locks. Once we got through the locks, we defeated inside security chains with a rubber band, a paper clip, and a thumbtack. For sliding bolts, we went back to the drill and coat hanger. We opened padlocks with fingernail-shaped pieces cut from a beer can. If you've noticed, I'm not explaining how to do all this. You'll have to learn that somewhere else. We finished every day with a practical exam, defeating an array of different locks within a set time period. This included escaping from handcuffs. We used any tool that could help us break into any place. We became proficient with cutting torches, metal cutting saws, jacks, cranes, hoists, and the famous jaws of life. Next came vehicles. We opened locked doors and defeated locked steering columns. We started vehicles with hot wire kits made under Dave's expert tutelage. These became part of the car theft equipment we kept with us ever after. It's probably not much of a surprise these days, but a decent car thief with a 3-tool theft kit can get into and start your car about as fast as you can with your keys. So can a Delta operator. We spent days on the demo range reviewing the basics and doing simple work with standard explosives. We made craters with dynamite and cut trees with TNT to form obstacles. We built and detonated things like earmuff charges to destroy bridge supports and fashioned C4 into special shapes to cut railroad rails, I-beams, and thick steel rods. Using specialized shaped charges made from wine bottles and C4, we cut into safes. We blew up first a large delivery van and then a house, using a bag of flour, a pad of steel wool, and 4 ounces of TNT. We made easy-to-use, safe-to-handle explosives with a trip to the local hardware store. An ammonium nitrate charge, for example, came from 200 pounds of fertilizer, 10 quarts of motor oil, and 5 pounds of dynamite. Bury a charge like that in the ground, and you can make a crater 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep. Then we worked with specialized breaching charges. These were explosive materials that allowed us to make very precise and surgical cuts into the doors and walls of any building or other man-made structure. Using these charges, we could slash our way to the inside of any target in a manner that was safe not only to ourselves, but to the hostages inside. Now we were in business. No barrier could keep us out. And after our training period with Dave, we headed back to the shooting house to put our newly acquired skills to practical application, with all the fingers we started with. For the next 3 days, Bill and his team put us through a series of tactical situations in the shooting house. Each drill required us to explosively penetrate the door of the room we were assaulting. When we hit 3 rooms simultaneously, it made some kind of a blast. One charge going off in the confines of the shooting house hallway was really something, but 3 going off simultaneously was like standing under an Atlas rocket at liftoff. The noise, shockwave, and fireballs from 3 charges detonating together were horrendous, and we were standing right in the middle of it. The lead man of each team was only inches from the door charge when it exploded, and the only protective gear we wore in those early days was foam earplugs. Only later did we go to protective eyewear, and later still, we added protective vests. Live and learn. Thankfully, we lived while we learned. On day 3 of that week, we got a real treat. We went out to the range for some joint work with the unit's snipers. The facade of a 2-story building had been built downrange to allow the snipers to shoot targets that rapidly appeared and disappeared in the windows and doorways. For this training session, the long gunners guided our movements to the target by radio, telling us when it was clear to move and halting us when targets were present. On our final approach to the target, and as we placed our charges on the doors, they covered our every movement by fire. Together, we worked on coordinated assaults. This is when the assault teams have approached the target undetected, have placed charges on the breach points, and are in position for the assault. When all teams signal ready, the commander takes over and sets the assault in motion with the radio command, "I have control, stand by. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute, execute, execute." On the count of 2, the snipers fire on any exposed terrorists, right over the heads of the assaulters crouched under the windows. On the count of 1, the charges are blown. At execute, the assaulters launch themselves inside the room and unleash hell. Then we worked on a very important variation of the coordinated assault. We made our approach as before, put everything in place, and all teams would signal ready. Then, nothing. The commander would hold us in position, or start and stop the countdown, or call us completely off the target and back to the assault position. It was an exercise to teach us that we were a disciplined force. Once we were switched on, we could also be switched off. But I have to tell you, it's difficult to back off that target once you're primed and ready to go, even in training. It's like calling a dog away from a cat he's just cornered. He might back off, but he ain't got to like it. We did each of these assaults again after dark, using the night as our principal ally. It made everything easier for us. Wearing night vision goggles, we could see in the dark and shoot just as accurately as in the daylight. Another benefit of the instinctive shooting technique is that even without goggles, you shoot as well in the dark as in the light. We finished late that night and were back at the ranch, the unit compound, cleaning weapons, when Bill made an announcement. "Guys, you all did well. The snipers told me before we left how much they enjoyed working with you today, and you can bet that Colonel Beckwith will know about it by tomorrow. We have just one main shooting house training objective left to accomplish during this phase, and it happens tomorrow and the next day. Remember how you were introduced to the shooting house that first day? Well, now it's your turn." The room went silent. "Each of you will take turns playing the hostage and sitting in the hot seat while your mates conduct a live fire assault. You will be a hostage 4 times. You will also rotate through every position on the assault team. Each assault will initiate with an explosive breach. Meet in the classroom for the mission briefing at 1000 hours. Get a good night's sleep. See you in the morning." And with a nonchalant wave of his hand, he dismissed us. This is going to be some final exam, I thought as I finished cleaning my pistol. Pass, and it's just another training day. Screw up, shoot and kill a friend, and you fail. That's a high penalty for flunking a test. I looked around the arms room at my friends and comrades. Do I trust my ability and skills enough to hurl deadly missiles within millimeters of their heads? One misstep, One flinch, and it could be catastrophic. My little girl plays with the children of the guys in this room. Yeah, Bill, get a good night's sleep. That's a good one. I'll never close my eyes tonight, I thought, as I put my gear away and walked to the parking lot.
And that was next section of Preparing the Force from Inside Delta Force by Eric L. Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.